Hello and welcome to the Discomfort Zone, the podcast that gets you comfortable with the uncomfortable. On today's show, you have a bit of a different format. You've just got me, Gemma, who obviously love my own voice, talking to the amazing Emma Levy, who has her own podcast, When Life Gives You Lemons. And we get really deep about both of us having a personal cancer experience, both of us loving fitness and exercise, and also just hearing Emma's story. So please give it a listen.
Hello.
Hi. So today is a bit of a different episode. It is just me, Gemma, for those who are not watching and just listening, as you probably should, I suppose, with a podcast. And I have a very special guest with me today, Emma Levy, who is sitting across from me in a very different seat because you have your own podcast here, don't you?
I do, and I normally sit in your chair.
Yeah. We've basically switched chairs because we thought it would make us feel different in terms of roles. Do you feel different?
Yeah, I feel like the guest today. I was just explaining before, I feel quite relaxed that I don't need to think about where this conversation's going to go. But on the other hand, I feel slightly nervous about where this conversation's going to go.
A bit out of control.
Exactly.
Maybe you're a bit in your discomfort zone.
I think I am.
I feel like I should let you say who you are and introduce yourself to people listening, because some of you may know you and some of you may not. And also plug your podcast, of course.
Of course. So my name is Emma Levy. When introducing myself, I'm going to start with the fact that I'm a podcaster. So I have the podcast When Life Gives You Lemons, which I launched in February 2023, so just 7 months ago. And the podcast came off the back of my own breast cancer journey. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in May 2020. And I mean, I'm sure we'll kind of talk about what motivated me to start the podcast. But I interview high-performing individuals who have been through adversity, but who have come back stronger. And I love getting into their mind and asking them how they've used their troubling times to strengthen them. I'm also a physiotherapist. So I've been a physiotherapist now for nearly 20 years. And in the past 10 years, I've worked with elite athletes. So I work with Team GB. I'm currently working with the British Olympic divers down in Stratford, so at the Olympic pool, which is amazing if anyone hasn't been there. So I work with the divers, and then I also work in what's called multi-sport. So we have a clinic in London, in Tottenham Court Road, and any UK sport-funded athletes, both Olympic and Paralympic athletes, can come and see us. So in that role, I see a massive variety of people. And I must say, I love my job as a physiotherapist. And this podcast journey has developed me personally, but also professionally. So I believe it's made me a better physio as well as a better person.
Why would it make you a better physio? I'm intrigued.
It's helped me to understand people's mindsets more,
Okay,
I think.
interesting.
So I've always been fascinated in the interrelationship between the mind and the body.
Right.
So I started work as a physiotherapist in the NHS. I worked in the NHS for 8 years. And when you work as a physio in the NHS, you see a whole range of people. And you see people that have maybe had pain for a very, very long time. So they're struggling with what we call chronic pain. And when I was working with patients with chronic pain, I became quite interested in the power of the mind, really, and mindset. And now, as a physiotherapist in sport, again, mindset's equally important, but in a slightly different way. But with all of my research and my reading that I've been doing for the podcast, that has helped me understand mindset and how I can help the athletes to use their mind to power their body. So I'm not a psychologist, and I'm quite clear, you know, when I'm talking to people, podcast and physio, I'm quite clear that I'm not a psychologist, but I do have a deeper understanding, I think, of how the brain works and how we can use that to move forward.
Okay. I find that very interesting. So if I take this back to you as an individual, then do you find that you have then learned how to use adversity or pain, or maybe pain's the wrong word, but a challenge in order to power your own performance and encourage you to do better, both professionally, but also I know you're very into exercise, as am I. So how do you kind of transcend that into your performance?
So how have I used my adversity
to
use that? I've definitely used, I've had a lot of chats about that on my own podcast. And I think I've learned so much from the guests that I've interviewed, basically. And there's so many key moments. And I don't want to kind of, pick them all out now, because I would be talking for an hour. But I suppose it's the things that that stand out is how following trauma, I do think we have a change of perspective. And so with that change of perspective, that definitely gives me a new drive and a new determination and a new motivation. So like we were discussing before, a month after my active cancer treatment finished, I did a triathlon. And I know you said you did a half marathon.
I did, yeah.
And I think it was having been through that trauma, and it was sitting in that chemo chair where I decided I was going to do the London Triathlon the following August. And it was having that goal in the distance that really, really did help me. And it was quite pivotal, I think, in my recovery, because I had a goal that I could see.
Yes.
And so goals are very important.
Yeah.
But it's just mindset as well, isn't it? So it's whether, I talk about this a little bit, like the victim mindset. So if we see ourselves as a victim, or if, and this is I always quote this lady, Edith Egar, the Holocaust survivor, but she says in her book, don't think why me, but think what now.
Yes.
And I use that all the time. How can we use our negative experiences to drive ourselves forward? Because we're all going to suffer at some point, aren't we? Yeah. Everyone is going to go through trauma. And I think it's how we use our mindset to move forward from that trauma that makes a difference to the people that kind of come through it positively and the people that maybe don't so much.
Okay. So do you think, on that note then, that actually there are elements where you can still be great and achieve greatness without facing adversity? Or do you think it's almost a necessary part of progress in order to achieve your goals?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, but I think, and I've been interested in this for a long time, actually. I read a book years ago called The Talent ID.
Okay.
And it was written by two people that worked in the UK sports system. And I must have read that. I want to say I read this about 8 years ago, so a long time. It was written after the London 2012 Olympics, I think. And it looked into a really interesting study that I found. It compared, what did they call it? I haven't read this for a while, so I might get this a little bit wrong. But it was basically comparing high-performing athletes with super-performing athletes. And the super-performing athletes back then were the people like Chris Hoy, Michael Phelps, the people that had achieved like more than one gold medal, basically. And it compared those people with the people that had maybe got silvers or maybe came fourth. So, we're still talking like top.
Yeah, they're not like average Joes in our world, but in that world. Yeah.
But they were comparing the super elite with the, I suppose, elite. And it did find that a high proportion of those super elite had some kind of adversity earlier in their lifetime. So whether that was loss of a parent, whether that was parents even splitting up, so getting divorced when they were a child, if they grew up in slightly less fortunate environments. But it was a very definitive study that the super elites had not had an easy upbringing.
Right.
And I think, the reason for that is because what that's saying is if you've had a slightly difficult past, then you are committed. Maybe you're more driven. Yeah. You're more driven to succeed because you know kind of how bad it can be and you don't want that and you want something else. And quite a recent example, actually, and I'm not going to get the names right all the times, but the quarter-finalist of the Wimbledon, the ladies' tennis quarter-finalist, that was an American lady.
Yeah.
Oh, what was her name?
I'm awful, so
I can't remember.
James, Google it. You can insert it in
something
later.
like Pegula.
Okay.
I think it might have been something Pegula. She has got to the last 4 quarterfinals of the Grand Slams, and she's never got beyond a quarterfinal. And I was quite interested by this.
Right.
And I kind of looked into it, and actually she's from a very, very fortunate background.
Okay.
And who knows if there's a link there, but I think, her parents are kind of like billionaires. And potentially life has been a little bit easier for her. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get that.
We're making assumptions here, but I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating that if people have been through hardships, why doesn't that break them down?
Yes.
But actually, and some people it does break them down. I was going to
say, some people it does.
Yeah.
So I do think there's still a bit of a power of who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
rather than just all the people that face adversity are then going to go on and be...
No, and we know that's not the case.
Yeah.
And that's looking at kind of nature versus nurture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And another book I always talk about is Grit by Angela Duckworth,
Yes.
which I find that very interesting, because that's basically looking at what we're discussing here. Is it your upbringing or is it your genes? And I think the answer is it's a bit of both.
Yes, I think that's probably right. So I'm just fascinated by you. And actually, I might take a step back for a second. So we actually went to the same school,
yes.
Although I was a couple of years younger. But
all right.
No. But I was. We weren't in the same school yet, but obviously went to the same school. I think school that we went to was quite high performing in terms of pushing us, and, you know, achievement was celebrated. Failure probably was not, is maybe a nice way to put it. But moving on from that, I think this kind of, the way that you've approached your cancer diagnosis and what you've done after, when I was listening to your story yesterday, and I didn't know all about, I know we'd gone for a walk, I think a couple of years ago, but I didn't know a lot about that. I felt like I was listening to myself talk.
Wow.
And I found that very rare. Like, I have found a lot of people that I've met along the way. I recently did the Copperfield trek. I spoke to a lot of people. It's interesting what you say just now about adversity and pushing, because I would look at you as someone that's done amazing things with your diagnosis and your adversity and achieving what you want to get out of it and seeing how you can turn the negative into a positive. I feel like to a point that's how I want to approach and how I have tried really hard to approach my life, particularly around fitness and exercise. But I've been around a lot of people recently with the same adversity, and I actually found that wasn't the case in a lot of them, which I actually found really surprising. So for me, it's quite almost like unusual and refreshing to hear somebody talk like you about how you've approached it and how successful you've decided to be with it. And when you decided to do a triathlon, for example, like I said, I did the Royal Parks half marathon, I think about 4 weeks after I finished my treatment. The week before I did the half marathon, because chemo ruins your body, I ended up getting the flu and got it so badly I was in hospital on a drip. And I remember the doctor coming in and my mum saying, "Can you tell her that she can't run?" And he was like, "Well, if she feels okay." And everyone's sort of going, shut up, that's not okay. And everyone kept saying to me, "You're mad." But for me, there wasn't a moment where I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. It was a bit like, I've been told for the last year all these things I can't do, so I am absolutely going to do it. And I kept saying to everyone, "Oh, I'll just stop. I'll do like 5K. And then if I don't feel good, I'll just stop." And then I got to 5K and I was like, well, obviously I'm going to keep going. So for you, when you decided, okay, do you know what? This has happened to me. I'm going to do a triathlon. I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was never a moment when you thought, oh, I might not do it. It was just, I'm going to do it. It's just about how I get there.
Yeah, 100%. A few things to pick up on firstly, though.
Pick up.
You know, when we talk about the fact that you've met other people that have been through similar things that don't have the mindset, I feel it's important to say I feel very fortunate that I had a good diagnosis.
Sure, I understand.
And a good prognosis. And I think, you know, not everyone does get given that. So that's the first thing I want to say. So I felt very hopeful from the beginning that I was going to be okay.
Okay, that's important.
I think that is important.
Yeah.
Whether I was wrong, you know, again, that could have been my mindset. I mean, scientifically I had a good prognosis, but again, I never doubted that. I do still obviously have a really large fear of recurrence of cancer, which I think we all have, but I kind of try and keep that a little bit separate.
Okay.
So that's kind of in a box over there. And then the other hand was like, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing to say. So that's helpful. And then the second thing to say is really we're discussing resilience here. And again, I always ask my guests if they think that they are resilient. I'll throw that back to you after.
Okay, sure.
But if I ask myself if I think I'm a resilient person before cancer, absolutely. So I think I was resilient before cancer. Mm-hmm. And if I analyse that, which I've recently done, why was I a resilient person and why was I able to have such a positive mindset? It's interesting because I came from a very fortunate background. I had a loving family. I had, you know, lots of support growing up. I had most material things I wanted. And I said this last week in my own podcast, I had two brothers. And I was the only girl growing up. And you know what? That did provide me with some challenges. So I was saying that my brothers used to literally like go into my bedroom, take my bras out of the cupboard, tease me, like show them to all their friends. Look, this is her bra size. They used to tease me for having periods. Right. And, you know, I did get like a fair bit of, I don't want to use the word bullying.
Yeah.
I don't know what the appropriate word is.
Sibling abuse.
Ish. But I wonder if, you know, things like that did actually contribute towards my resilience. But I absolutely feel I was a resilient person before cancer. So when the diagnosis came, and like I said, I didn't for once think I wasn't going to be okay. And then when I set my goal of competing in that London triathlon, I didn't once doubt the fact I wouldn't be there. And but I strongly believe, and I've always believed this, that we can do whatever we set our minds to. So I've got my 40th birthday next year. And I mean, the more I say this to camera, the more I've got to do it.
Well, yeah, once you put it out into ether.
I know, and I already have put it out.
Capture a reel. We're going to do it.
I'm doing a massive challenge, basically. For me, it's a big challenge, a big sporting challenge.
Can you say what it is?
Yeah, we can. We are going to do a big London challenge every month of the year.
Okay.
So I'm going to do the London Marathon, Ride London, London Triathlon, Swim Serpentine, High Rocks, the half marathons. I'm probably going to abseil down something. I want to do something mega every month of the year. And, you know, that's fairly significant because it means I'm going to have to obviously transform from being a runner to a cyclist to a swimmer in quite a short space of time. So it is big, but I don't for once doubt that I'm not going to be able to do it.
Okay, wow, that's amazing.
I mean, do you not feel the same if you set yourself a challenge?
Do I feel the same? I, for the most part, do feel the same, yes. I think I've got, if I can swear, I think I've got a bit of like a fuck you complex, which is if you tell me I can't do something, then I'll probably say, okay, well, fuck it, fuck you, I'm going to do it. I do feel the same. It's interesting. I think like I would look at you and I would think you are, and this isn't like me fangirling or cheesing, but I'd be like, you are stronger than I am. I don't know why I think that. I don't know. I think we probably achieve very similar things, but I'm sure we can probably my brother here to kind of dig into the psychology of why I feel like that. But I think I think I can face most challenges. I think if I put my mind to something, for the most part, I can do it. But I'm not sure I have quite as much conviction in myself.
Do you think you're a resilient person?
Yes, I do think I'm a resilient person. I think I'm a resilient person. I don't think cancer was the hardest thing I had to face. I think maybe now, no, that's not true. Cancer was probably, in terms of like mortality, the scariest or closest thing I've come to facing my own mortality. I find life after cancer much harder than life during cancer, strangely.
Why is that?
I think people think you're okay. I think you have cancer, and when you're having cancer, I used to articulate it as it was like having a job. It was like on Monday I had to go and have blood tests, and then on Tuesday I'd have to go and have chemo, and then I felt a bit rotten on a Wednesday, and then on a Thursday I'd have to go and have a follow-up appointment, and then by the Friday it was time to do whatever I had to do for the weekend, and then it was all over again. Then you've got to fit in hair appointments and whatever else, and it was like having a job. And I never thought, I remember going through this whole treatment thinking, I don't have to think about anything. I am told where to go, what to do, what to take, what pill to swallow, what injection to have. Interestingly, the thing I got really passionate about during that time was that I was never told how to exercise or what to eat, which I think we can talk about. But I found that really, really disconcerting. And I understand why. You're in a room full of doctors and they're going to medically tell you what medicine is going to make you feel better. And I asked them if there was anything around, you know, can I exercise? Or not can I exercise? Well, yeah, I said, can I exercise? Of which they were like, yes, just do gentle. And I was like, cool, obviously one ear out the other. And then so what should I eat? And they just said, oh, well, you just need your strength. That was kind of the only information I really got. Because lots of people go, oh, and are you now a vegan? Are you now I don't know, do you now only eat organic? Oh, lots of different questions. And I tried to do my own research, of which it was very confusing. So I did find there wasn't a lot around exercise and nutrition. But in terms of life after cancer, you kind of get through that final day, and like you said, people don't always have a great, prognosis and journey. I did at the time, and rung the bell and kind of walked out the door, and I was literally like, right, okay, what now? And people don't check in as much, and people don't necessarily say, are you okay, as much. So you're kind of left with everyone around you to suddenly like, oh shit, here's this big gaping hole of fear. And I think the bigger thing I had was, and I went to talking to someone about this, is, well, like you said, what now? Like, what was that all for? I just went through all of this stuff. I just went through all of this trauma. And during it, I wanted to get back to my old life, my old job. I craved like being on the platform at 8:05 to catch the train, the normality and the mundaneness of like routine of rushing from a nursery drop to going to the office and doing a job and coming home, and that being life. And then when I went back to work, I was a bit, okay, well, half of this feels a bit insignificant. I didn't have a job that was necessarily helping people. I work in advertising. I make lipstick ads look pretty, but it didn't make me feel fulfilled, or doesn't make me feel fulfilled. And I just think I just got left with this like, oh God, what now? Plus you have the fear, like you said, of recurrence, and you try and paint this picture of being really physically strong, really resilient, which I think is the question that I'm currently like half answering and half not. And I don't know. I think like cancer for me was definitely the hardest thing I faced in terms of being aware of your mortality and afterwards, and now trying to navigate life as somebody who's had cancer. And are you supposed to be a cancer survivor? Are you supposed to be a personal trainer? Are you supposed to be a mum, a podcaster, a professional?
How many years ago was your cancer?
So next month will be my 5-year.
So do you think have you found your why?
Have I found my why? I've nearly found my why. Okay. This is the first year, interesting, for example, with the podcast, this is the first year I've been able to talk about it. This is the first year I could probably sit across from you and hear you talk about cancer diagnosis and not be like immediately triggered into a really negative headspace. And it's hard because everything you watch has cancer in it, right? I mean, like something as mundane as, so you turn on an advert, or it will be a storyline in EastEnders, or it will be literally like a mention. It's everywhere, so it's really hard to avoid it. And I would just spend my life like flicking channels, turning down radios, changing things, minimizing pop-up banner ads, saying reject this ad on Instagram. Or I was being served content all the time because my algorithms were like so leaning towards cancer that I felt like it was just in my life. So this is definitely the first year that I can talk about it.
So why do you think that is? Is that because of time, or has anything else changed?
I think time. Yeah, I think time. I'm actually, I don't know how this is turning this interview at me. I'm actually have been doing, last year I decided that like fitness was a real passion of mine, exercise. I know you said in your podcast last week that exercise saved your life, and it definitely, I had the same thing. I think I found my cancer because of exercise, because I was so aware of my body. I didn't have a lump. I didn't have an obvious symptom, but I did feel funny. Okay. And that's why I went to get checked, and that's how they found it. Wow. So it was just because I was so in tune with myself and being healthy. The other side of that is like, how the fuck do two of the healthiest people probably sat in a room who, like we said, are going to abseil down a building and like run a marathon, end up being two people in their 30s with cancer? Like it seems extraordinarily unfair. You can live the healthiest life in the world, and yet that still happen. But last year I think I decided that after having gone through that, I loved fitness and exercise so much. I'd always done it on the side. It was never actually my career. I've been in marketing and advertising for 15 years. And I decided, okay, Gemma, I'm going to see if I can build this up on the side. And did. And it's gone quite well. And I'm actually leaving my full-time job in marketing on Friday, which has been a decision I've really toyed with for the last 3 years. Okay. And so Friday is my last ever day.
And that's your 5-year cancer anniversary.
And that's basically, So I think like I'm having this kind of, okay, well, that's it. If I don't try, I would literally wake up with cold sweats and be like, oh my God, I haven't found my why. I haven't done what I'm supposed to do. And I didn't have the passion before for, a career in the same way that, you know what you are. Kind of your career in a way almost like defines you. And I didn't find that. I found it defined me in terms of being like a high performance marketing individual, but I didn't find that marketing was a thing I was passionate about.
But I actually, we need to discuss that, because
Okay.
I learned a lot about that from one of my guests, David Smith, the Paralympian, who said that his psychologist advised him not to call himself David Smith, the athlete, in the same way that I used to call myself Emma Levy, the physio, and that we shouldn't actually be defined by titles like that, because when he lost his ability to be able to do sport, that challenged his mental health significantly. And I took that on board after that conversation, and I thought, that's a really, really good point. So it made me, following that conversation, it really made me kind of work out what are my values. And, you know, I'm not just a mother, just a wife, just a friend, just a physio, just a podcaster. But I, you know, what do I enjoy doing? Like, you know, I enjoy traveling. I enjoy learning new things. I enjoy discussion, like stimulating discussion with interesting people. I enjoy challenging my body physically. And I think learning that has actually really helped. So it's helped me to find my why by kind of analysing what my values are. So I think that's quite important. Sorry to interrupt.
No, interrupt me. Please do interrupt me. Like, it's quite nice to have it on the other foot as well.
No, I found that interesting. And then also, I've forgotten the other thing I was going to say. It'll come back.
Finding your why,
It will come back. It was something. Keep going.
We'll keep going. But yeah, so I think it's just interesting, and resilience is, you're right, like we are talking about resilience. It's why we do the discomfort zone as well, because I think when it comes to looking at what do you do with getting in your discomfort zone, we talk about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and actually being in situations that aren't comfortable all the time. And that might be pushing your body to extreme physical levels. It might also be changing a career. It might also be stepping into a gym for the first time. It might be looking at yourself in a mirror and saying, I don't like to look in the mirror. Like the amount of clients I've got, and I say, well, let's track your progress, you know, take pictures, keep them for yourself just to see your progress, and say, well, I don't like to look at them. I don't want to see myself. And that's okay. But clearly there's a reason. It makes you, it makes you uncomfortable. So being a bit more kind of comfortable with the uncomfortable, I think, does come down to being a bit more resilient and being able to say, okay, well, it's not going to affect me. I'm not going to have one bad experience and then think I can't perform, or I can't, you know, be proud or be happy.
I remember what I was going to say.
Say it. Go on. Go for it.
We'll come back to feeling discomfort zone. I was going to take you up on the survivorship thing.
Oh, yeah.
So because actually I've had 2 cancer patients, cancer thrivers, shall we call them, on my podcast, who have said the same thing, that we don't talk about survivorship enough.
Yes.
Because following cancer, people love to forget it's happened.
Yeah.
But we feel changed forever.
Yes, I totally agree.
And what I've been fascinated by is how many of my guests on the podcast feel that their life is enhanced following their trauma and even following their cancer. And I've kind of asked them, I've said, well, how long did that take?
Yeah. Because
I'm not there yet.
No.
So even though I've discovered more about myself, I've, you know, gone down this podcast path, which has really filled me with joy, and I've loved the whole thing, and I've seen positives that have come out of my cancer. It has definitely not yet enhanced my life, and if I could go back in time, I wouldn't want it to happen. But it's so many people say, no, if I went back in time, I'd want that to happen, and I'm fascinated by that.
Okay, so I am not there either. And actually, I think that's such an interesting point. One I had written down, so I'm glad you brought it up, because I would have forgotten to talk about it. And I wanted to ask you that, because that's really interesting, because I look at some of the content you put out and the way that you project yourself as somebody who's like absolutely embraced it. But do you feel like you're embracing it and talking around cancer a lot? Because you're not quite as far down the line as I am, and I couldn't have done that 2 years on.
I've embraced it because I feel like I have to.
Yeah,
because it's happened to me, and I can't change it happening to me. And here comes the not why, but what now?
Yes.
So it has happened to me. It is part of my journey now. And so now I want to try and make that into something positive.
Which you definitely are, by the way.
Thank you. I also, when I was going through cancer, I totally came off social media. Okay. So I wasn't one of these people that posted about it at all. And I withdrew from life basically for probably for that year.
Right.
And I didn't put it out there. And I only started to put it out there once I felt, I suppose, strong enough to do so.
Did you tell people about it?
Well, I was quite fortunate because of COVID.
Right,
so
okay.
COVID didn't provide many positives throughout the cancer experience.
Okay, no, I can imagine.
Yeah, but one positive was that I didn't have to face people at the school drop. You know, there's a lot of kind of parents, my kids' friends that didn't know it happened. Okay. I didn't have to see people. I didn't have any FOMO. What was I missing?
Yeah.
So, yes, I did tell people, but it was quite easy to stay hidden away as well.
Yeah. No one was looking at you with that kind of sad eyes. Oh, gosh, that's the mum.
I didn't get that at all.
Yeah.
And then so by the time I was back in society, I'd kind of felt already quite a lot physically stronger.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, for me, I had my head covered and I got this hair. I lost my hair, but I got diagnosed the week of my daughter's first birthday. It was also the week that she started nursery. So no one really knew. I knew a couple of people there, but a lot of the time people didn't know who I was. I think they probably thought that's just what I looked like. Like, you couldn't really see that different. I had a wig on, but it was attached.
Yeah.
I never went in with like a headscarf. I was really adamant that I would do as many school and nursery drops as I could do because I wanted to feel as normal as I could. So I'm very good friends with a lot of my mums that I met through nursery, and they all have this very funny, they think it's hilarious. They all said, when we met you, we thought you were just a complete bitch. We were like really cold and unfriendly. And the other day I only twigged, I was like, do you know what? I was actually going through cancer. So maybe I was just really, really stressed and a bit sad. And then obviously they all felt really bad because you're like, oh, well, I dropped the C-bomb on you. So now you feel really guilty. But your point, survivorship. I wanted to go back to that. I am with you. I am not there yet. The most viewed video I ever did on social media was about this. And I think maybe we talked about it after, that I went to this event where Copperfield, the charity, had asked me to be an ambassador. And I sat in a room. It was like a day course, and it was basically all around like how do you go into corporates and schools and talk to people about checking themselves, which I feel very passionate about, as I know you do. Early diagnosis absolutely probably is why we're both sitting here having this conversation and having, you know, an innocuous coffee at the same time. But that was one part of it. Part of the day was obviously people sharing their experiences, and there was one lady in the room who, and I have spoken to about this since, because I've said, I hope you don't mind I talk about you, I never name her or whatever, but she really affected me. She talked around loving her cancer diagnosis, being so utterly grateful for it that she asked us all to stand up and take a picture so that if she did get re-diagnosed, she would remember this moment and could put it in her scrapbook. Wow. And I just thought, firstly, that's the most fucking weird sentence I've ever heard in my life. Like, I can't ever imagine. I don't think this is a time thing. Sitting there thinking, well, if I get re-diagnosed, I really hope I've got a picture of this moment. Like, that's not me. She was completely grateful for her diagnosis.
Did you ask her why?
I asked her why, and she said the same thing. She said she feels like it's made her a stronger person, a better person. She felt like she saw life differently, so she appreciated life, which I do appreciate life. I'm still, though, if you ask me, and people do ask me, I was going to ask you this question, people do ask me all the time, one of the questions I get asked is, are you really grateful, or are you glad you've had cancer? And I will absolutely 100% always say absolutely not. If someone says to you as a mum, would you like to maybe not survive, you're going to say no. And because it does change you. And I think you have to work really hard, like you said, at finding your what now. Life becomes a little bit murky. I get very angry at myself if I don't feel like I'm living my best life. And then I get angry at myself if I don't feel like I'm grateful for life. I don't know if you feel that. But it's hard to always be grateful when you're doing the mundane as well, like the school run and washing up a pair of trousers or, you know, life has to also be a bit boring. And you're supposed to, in a weird way with survivorship, I think, to either feel like every day is covered in rainbows and sparkles, or you should be in a hole. But there's probably a bit in between that it's really hard to navigate.
I think the way I understand it is when my guests say that their life is enhanced from their trauma, a lot of them say it's because it's changed their perspective.
Yes.
So when you're talking about things being covered in rainbows and sparkles and the mundane, yeah, the school drop is not fun. But could we shift our perspective on that and say, I'm so lucky I get to do the school drop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's what I try and do now is, because, of course it's not all rainbows and sparkles. And I shout at my kids. I've got 3 boys and they are loud and noisy and stressful.
Yes.
But I do try and shift that to, I'm so grateful I've got 3 boys that have so much positive energy, and that noise fills my house with laughter, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
So, and again, because I've spoken to these people that really do feel their life is enhanced, I'm starting to have a bit more of an understanding about it. But yeah, I don't fully get it yet.
No. And I also think it's okay to not get it. I think it's okay to not get it, because I think part of going through treatment, particularly part of being somebody that was, very into fitness and exercise, and your career is focused on the body, right? I mean, you see people's bodies all the time. You see what amazing things they can do. When you look at a body in a different way, you think, oh God, this is the body that I've tried to make as strong as possible. And weirdly, I looked at it and thought, I feel like it's trying to kill me. Like I'm having this weird dichotomy of, like, I'm really fit, yet I'm not enjoying the fact that this is the body I've now got.
So you lost trust in your body.
Massively.
Whereas again, if you shift that mindset to look at how far you've come, despite the fact you had breast cancer and you had this, reconstruction, and I imagine you went through like the awful things like cording and all of that stuff that no one talks about.
No one talks about.
And you've probably still got scar tissue from radiotherapy, which leaves you with pain and tightness.
Yeah.
Yet look at what your body is able to do despite that.
Yes. That's a good point. I think we all have to listen to it, but you're right. Like, at the end of the day, if someone says, like, would I go back and change it? I think for me, as I feel like we're both saying, yes. It's not how I would have written. No. But again, we can't write life, right? And I'm sure that's what you see all the time, and what you hear about is that you don't know what's going to happen. So it's how you cope, how you are okay with these coping mechanisms of what happens when life doesn't go to plan. And I think that's also really important with either with survivorship or either just with being in that kind of discomfort zone area, like having the tools to cope when life doesn't go to plan, and almost like having a plan, even like now, right? Like having a plan of what next is great. But do you feel like because you've had like a bit of a roadmap and you've been veered off that roadmap before, you try not to be so stuck to a plan in case life does curveball?
Like, absolutely. And I've talked about this a lot as well, is that I used to be so goal driven.
Okay.
And I used to jump from one goal to the next. I would achieve this goal. What's the next goal? Achieve that goal. What's the next thing? And I was consistently setting goals. And now I've learned, because I've reflected on the fact that it's so important to enjoy the now, the process.
Yeah.
And, be where your feet are, like one of my guests said. And enjoy the now and the present, because if we're always looking for the next goal, then life just whizzes past, doesn't it? And a great example of this is with the Olympic system. Like, we've got Paris Olympics next summer. We're already planning for LA, which is 4 years after Paris.
Right, okay.
So we haven't even finished Paris yet, and we're already on the next thing. But like, we've got to enjoy the now. Do you know what I mean? We've got to like make sure what we want to achieve today is happening. So, I've definitely changed my perspective on goal setting and process and enjoying the now. That's not to say I don't still plan and set goals.
Okay, so on that note, and before we kind of wrap up, like, I want to really understand your perspective on time. My main perspective that's shifted is time. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't like waiting for things in case they don't happen.
Yeah.
Or that sounds really dramatic, but I'm very aware of time being like a gift. And when I hear people say, next year or in 5 years, I find that quite strange to listen to. I find myself wanting to see, no, let's do things now. Like, do you find that with time?
Yeah.
You're very aware of it in a way that you weren't before?
Yeah. And that for me is being where my feet are and enjoying the now.
Yeah.
So yes, if I want to go on a holiday and my husband says, let's do that next year or 2 years, I'm like, absolutely not. We're gonna do that now.
Yeah.
And that we often argue about that. So okay. I'm the same. I don't like to wait for things because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow?
That's probably our biggest argument. I would say exactly the same. I think there are these sort of nuances in these communities of survivorship that people understand for the most part when you've been through that. But I think when you haven't, why would you be aware of time in the same way? And when you were going through your treatment and looking at life and what you wanted to achieve, like you said, you're very goal driven. Do you feel like where you are now, you are achieving all those goals that you set yourself?
I don't even know if, this was a goal as such. So, the podcast came out of discussions when I was going through chemo and I was going for lots of walks for my recovery, and I was talking, and I listened to podcasts loads because during COVID I wasn't allowed any friends or family at chemo.
Right.
So I would literally arrive, I'd put my headphones in and I would start listening to podcasts, and I would listen to podcasts all day. And before cancer, I'd never even listened to one episode.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, which is quite amazing.
Yeah.
So I discovered podcasts during cancer. And then I got the idea of my podcast. And then, it probably did become a goal. I want to reach people. So, I do have a goal because I want my podcast to be massive. And I want to reach as many people as possible because that's my ultimate goal. It's a bit fluffy, isn't it?
No, I don't think so.
I just want to reach people.
Yeah. But I don't think that is fluffy at all. I think it's exactly like you said, when you do a bit of a values exercise. I similarly did something similar, and I did a values exercise, which a really smart guy I've worked with in the past sent me to kind of check myself and say, and he explained it really well in that life has sort of 3 buckets. There's the life you want to live. There's the life kind of you really don't want to live, the one that's really not in line with your values, and then there's where you are in the middle. And if you look at them as sort of like 3 key circles, and you're in that middle, and you look at yourself as where you are, where are you on that spectrum? Are you currently doing the things that you want to do? And you don't have to be there, but are you kind of putting the parts in place to achieve that? Or are you living where you don't really want to be? Where you don't really want to be is probably comfortable.
Yeah.
Where you want to be is uncomfortable, but it's far more in line with the values. Yeah. That comfortable place is easy, but often it's not really in line with your values at all. And when I kind of mapped it out and looked at it, I was very much, and hence why I think probably when we're talking about the why and making these life decisions, that's where I've got to. I was very much living in this comfortable life, which I knew and was familiar, and I needed stability for a while, so that was okay. But those values were so far from what came out of this quiz, which was that I loved risk, and I loved adventure, and I loved fear and challenge, and I was living in this comfortable, stable routine. And I think that for me was like the hardest thing to kind of swallow, is that, okay, finding my why after all this time, gone through my experiences, gone through cancer. I want to talk to people. I have talked to people. I was quite open on social media because I thought at the time, I was 30 when I was diagnosed. I knew very few 30-year-olds who were going through what I was going through, particularly with young children and families. Everywhere I looked was like an old lady who was kind of being permissioned to lie on the couch for a year and rest because chemo's grueling, and then you're trying to stop a child from basically killing themselves, which is their ultimate goal as they're a toddler, right? It's like, don't throw yourself down the stairs, don't swallow that bead, like don't stick that up your nose. So like it was really hard, and I find those values exercise have been massively important, and I think only now have I realized that that's where I need to be in order to kind of live my best life. So
hard choices are uncomfortable.
Hard choices are really uncomfortable.
But that's where we find opportunity.
Okay. And before we finish, what's next?
Oh, wow.
Go on.
What is next? So we've spoken about the 2024 challenge. I will be involving as many people as possible.
Can I get involved in something?
Yes, because there is and this is when I'm going to put this out there, for my 40th year, there is a £40,000 fundraising target.
Oh, amazing.
And the way I'm going to get that is by getting people into my teams. So every month they'll have different people fundraising with me. So I really think we can smash that. 100%. And I'd love to make that just a mega year, basically. And, like you said, saying F you to cancer, look at where I was, look at where I am now. And I think for me, that is going to be a real positive, amazing year. And then podcast is I'm loving it. Season 3, I'm in the process of kind of thinking about planning.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to continue the podcast. Physio, keep going. I'll be at the Olympics in Paris next summer. So loads of exciting things to
really
look forward to.
Exciting things. And what will be the hardest challenge of your 40th plan for you?
The marathon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did the London Marathon when I was 23, I think. So like 15 years ago. And as I crossed the line, I said to my husband, who was then my boyfriend, never let me do that ever again.
Yeah.
And I hated it.
Did
I honestly hated every single minute.
Okay.
I hated it. But
oh God, okay. Okay.
Half of me feels that I'm a different person now.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to smash it.
I think you will.
Yeah.
I mean, I really debate running it, the marathon. I haven't. I'm not sure I would. I've done 3 half marathons, and it's funny you say that. Every time I finished, I thought, who the fuck does this twice?
Yeah.
That's literally the first thing I think. Why would you do this again?
Yeah.
And then have to finish.
And I don't get why people enjoy it, but maybe this time next year I'll tell you, oh my God, that was like a highlight of my life.
Well, they've got that kind of that saying, isn't it? So like, how do you know if someone's run a marathon? Well, don't worry, they'll tell you. So I think we'll all know. It's true, right? We'll all know when you've done the marathon. But Emma, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for opening up and also getting me to talk about things I probably haven't talked about either. Where can people find you and listen to your podcast? That's also important.
Yes, they can listen to When Life Gives You Lemons. You can find me on all the normal podcast platforms. And I'm on Instagram as personal Emma Levy Physio, and then Life Lemons Podcast is my Instagram handle. And yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, please do.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Obviously, as always, please do follow us on Nidajiva Gemma Fit and also Dr. Matt Slavin on Instagram. Again, you can listen to the Discomfort Zone on, like Emma said, all the usual channels. And yeah, we will be back soon. Thank you.